Okay, so we're running a little bit late, but that's okay. We'll just eat into discussion time a little bit. Plus, you're not going to have to listen to me talk a whole lot up here because I didn't have any slides put together for our first panel session, which is going to consist of a few short presentations, like 5 to 7 minutes, from 3 different experts in their relative fields surrounding honeybee management and wild bee conservation. And so this panel is in response to a whole lot of emails that I get from honeybee keepers and also from wild bee conservationists. So honeybee keepers play an integral role in our agriculture, in our education, in producing honeybee products, and also educating people about the value of pollination. And yet increasing evidence has shown that there are negative impacts of managed pollinators on our wild ones, right? And so honeybee keepers are interested in how can I help mitigate any potential negative impacts that I have? And wild bee enthusiasts are interested in how can we not have those negative impacts, right? And so I just want to iterate at the start of this panel that I am not anti-honeybee, even though I'm somebody who studies wild pollinators. I'm pro-understanding, right? And so I think it's really critical that we contextualize honeybees in the correct way, right? And that we discuss honeybee management in terms of why we keep honeybees and what the goals of keeping honeybees are, because they are 100% unmanaged species, right? Just like you wouldn't save the declining birds by rearing backyard chickens, it doesn't detract from the value of having backyard eggs. They're delicious, right? And so it's just that we don't want to have too many backyard chickens because then you got all kinds of different problems. So that's just my setup for this panel. If you have questions, again, raise your hand either now, throughout, or when we get to the discussion to get a card. And I understand that people could have really passionate ideas or thoughts or opinions about some of the stuff that's going to be presented on this panel. And I would just request that you all be very respectful of everyone else here because everyone values different things, right? And conservation is a value-driven field. So thanks so much for letting me give that little spiel. I'm going to give a quick little introduction to our panelists all right now, and then I'll just go through and transfer to our Zoom presenter. So we're going to hear from 3 different people. The first is going to be Sarah Red-Laird. Let me pull up your bio. Is the founder and executive director of the Bee Girl organization, a grassroots nonprofit centered on bee habitat conservation through research, regeneration, and education. She's a graduate at the University of Montana's College of Forestry and Conservation and the Davidson Honors College with a degree in resource conservation, focused on community collaboration and environmental policy. She also serves as the Kids and Bees program director for the American Beekeeping Federation, and is committed to good policy, community collaborations, and has served as president of the Northwest Farmers Union and Western Apicultural Society, and as a board member for the National Farmers Union. Did I get all that? And so she's going to be our resident honeybee expert for the panel. We're then going to hear from Dr. James Hung, who's going to be on Zoom. That's why you see the Zoom window up there. He's a pollination ecologist whose research focuses broadly on plant pollinator mutualisms, on how environmental factors influence pollinator communities and the pollination services that those communities provide. He also works in both natural and human-modified systems, studying topics from how climate change and invasive species impact pollinators and plant ecology, to pollinator conservation across the Great Plains. He's a member of the Oklahoma Biological Survey and the Oklahoma Natural Heritage Inventory, so he's a native bee expert, but he's also studied the impacts of managed honeybees on natural ecosystems and recently hosted a symposium at the International Union for the Study of Social Insects on this very topic. So he's probably got lots of insight on this very interaction. And then finally, we'll hear from Christy Briles, who is a biogeographer and paleoecologist right here at CU Denver, who studies how humans and climate have influenced ecosystems through space and time. Her research in palynology and passion for beekeeping led her to develop the CU Denver Bee Project, which goals are to conduct research on beekeeper practices in the greater Denver metro area and how they impact honeybee health and foraging patterns in urban and suburban environments. More recently, she's become really interested and concerned about native bees and has been studying their diversity around Denver and teaching about native bee diversity, ecology, and biogeography at the university. So, big thank you to all three of our panelists, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Okay, it's working. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I am from Southern Oregon, actually. The Bombus franklinii, the bumblebee who was the first to be listed and is now probably extinct, is actually in my backyard. So I'm from Ashland, and Mount Ashland is where that bumblebee was. So, Robin Thorpe was one of my mentors. And so I was so excited to hear our bumblebee mentioned, but also sad to reflect on that she is probably no more. But anywho, like Adrian said, I run a small nonprofit. We work actually all across the country and have worked all across the world, but we're based in Little Southern Oregon. We're a grassroots nonprofit centered on bee habitat conservation through regeneration and education. And so I study both native bees and honeybees, and I'm a beekeeper, and I just wanted to start it out on a super positive note of why do I love honeybees? Why am I so passionate about honeybees and at the same time so passionate about native bees? And if I went into all the different reasons as to why I love native bees, we'd be here forever because they're so cool and so weird, and so many of them are so different. But I'll just start with why I love honeybees so much. So number one is honey. I absolutely love keeping bees in my own neck of the woods. We have had apiaries. Until recently, I had apiaries all over Southern Oregon, and it was so fascinating to taste all of the different honey that would come from just a few miles apart. And I also have a wide honey collection from honey all over the world, and I absolutely love that we're able to taste what our landscape looks like through the honeybee hive. Honeybees can help us out on some pretty cool, innovative projects. So when I was a researcher at the University of Montana in Missoula, I actually got to work as a subcontractor for the U.S. Department of Defense, teaching honeybees how to sniff landmines, which is a really cool technology and can potentially save human lives. And probably number one is I just think that they're sparkly little magical orbs of wonder. I think that honeybees are absolutely endlessly fascinating. I love keeping them. I love the experience of being a beekeeper. I love the bond that I have with each one of my hives and getting to know the personality of the hive and the research implications for what keeps coming out of honeybee hives and from the honeybee colonies is just so interesting and fascinating and magical. You could spend a lifetime, many people have spent their whole lifetime learning about honeybees, and there's still so much more to learn. So we've talked about this a little bit already, is we are losing our bees. That is a fact. Beekeepers are having a harder time more now than ever keeping their hives alive. And so why are we losing our bees? I love this model from Dr. Marla Spivak from the University of Minnesota, and she really shows the issues that we're having with honeybees, and it is both honeybee problems on the inside of the hive, they're listed in blue, and honeybee problems on the outside of the hive, they're listed in green. And she really feels like nutrition is the thing that pulls all of these things together. So we know that we're losing our bees through parasites and disease, through pesticides, through climate change. And for me, and also Marla, nutrition is the biggie. And when I say nutrition, I mean habitat loss, so the abundance of flowers that are on our landscape, floral diversity loss, so the diversification, the diversity, the biodiversity of flowers that are on our landscape. And then the nutrient density in pollen, which is a theory that I have, and I'm working with the Oregon State University Honeybee Lab to study nutrient density in pollen collected by bees depending upon land use management. So is nutrient density different on regeneratively managed farms versus conventionally managed farms? We know that our food can be different depending upon the nutrient density, but I'm interested in bee food, so we'll see. And the reason that nutrition is so important and good nutrition can help our honeybees and other bees be more resilient to all of those other factors is this thing called vitellogenin, which is inside of honeybee. It's their bee fat, basically. So the cross-section on the left-hand side is a honeybee during the nectar and pollen dearth. So there's not a lot of floral resources coming into the hive. And then the cross-section on the right is a fat bee. That's a well-fed bee who has not been given pollen patties or one sweeping field of sunflowers or sweeping orchard of almonds. This is a bee that has massive diversity of pollen coming into the honeybee hive. That's the only way that you can have a bee that looks like this. And it's important because it balances juvenile hormones. It's a food storage reservoir. They use it to synthesize jelly for their workers and their queens. And it really is the essential part of their immune system. So I got to work on this really cool project in Southern Oregon. It's a vernal pool restoration project that was originally a 200-acre ranch that had been overgrazed, flattened and overgrazed since the 1800s when homesteaders originally came to Southern Oregon. And the Nature Conservancy and the Oregon Department of Transportation worked together to designate it as a conservation bank and then to restore the vernal pools to their original glory. So there are these perennial pools that they're basically wetlands for an arid system. And I got to help with the bee part of it. So I monitor bees and I helped advise them using data-informed decision-making as to which flowers we should be planting more of, where those flowers should be, and which flowers sometimes are seen as naughty, some of the non-native flowers. But there were observations. We actually saw that the diversity, the floral diversity and the health of the system was as such that those naughty flowers were kept in check. And then a lot of them would actually feed a lot of our native bees when nothing else was blooming. We're in interesting times with climate change. And so in this property, we decided to take it where we can get it. So I got to spend 5 years during bee season watching nature heal, regenerate, function, and thrive. Here's another couple of photos from that. We used prescribed burning and grazing to manage invasive grasses that didn't have any benefits to the pollinators out there. And here's the lessons from the restored natural system, despite heat waves. And so I had this project going on, and at the time I had 4 other habitat projects on agricultural landscapes going within the same area in Southern Oregon. I had honeybees at each of those spots, and I had honeybees at this spot too, which was quite controversial at the time, but they did so much massive land movement, and 75% of our native bees live in the ground, that when they did this restoration, this original restoration, there really wasn't a lot of native bees in the system. And so the land manager actually asked if I would bring honeybees out, and I was like, well, this actually is a really interesting opportunity to be able to watch the interaction between honeybees and native bees and watch to see if honeybees even do pollinate native flowers. And so I have a whole entire webpage on this on beegirl.org if you want to learn more about what we found. But I only had 5 hives there. I didn't have 1,000, I didn't have 100. I had 5 hives. I managed them very well. They were disease-free, mite-free. I fed them during dearths. And what we saw was, despite heat waves, severe drought, and fire, not just the prescribed fire locally, but we also had a fire called the Almeda Fire, which destroyed 3 towns in Southern Oregon and blacked out the sky for weeks. Native bee populations increased. We started with 7 genus of bees and went up to 22 by the time that I left. Native bee diversity increased, and honeybee health was consistently stronger at the vernal pool property in comparison with apiaries in my agricultural landscapes and also urban settings. And what I mean by consistently stronger was there was lower varroa mite levels, higher overwintering rate, lower pathogen counts, and they made 5 to 10 times more honey than the other bees did. And so while I was out there, I kind of started coming up with this observation that I felt like honeybees are livestock and our native bees are like wildlife. And they can coexist if managed properly. So this is a photo of a property that I'm working on in Montana currently in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem by Tom Minor Basin. And grizzly bears come down and dig for caraway roots alongside Malou Anderson's cattle. So here they are, wildlife and livestock coexisting. And she manages the wildlife on her property and manages the livestock very, very well. They use a combination of range riding, rotational grazing, and low-stress livestock handling to handle their livestock. I just think that there's so much potential here in grazing areas and in rangelands for bee habitat and for coexistence. So if we look at a map of how land use is divvied up in America, the number one use is livestock, pasture and range, and then also crops that are grown to feed that livestock. 41% of the contiguous United States is used to feed livestock. But honeybees are livestock. And so why can't we be doing a better job of feeding bees out here too, and also facilitating coexistence between our wildlife bees, our native bees, and our honeybees? Right now, we're not doing a good job. So of the 41% of the landscape out there, we really don't have very good intentional crops, forage, habitat for bees. There was a study that just came out last year from USGS and I think actually University of Nebraska, Lincoln worked on it as well. And they looked at the prairie pothole region. So it's a big chunk of the Midwest up into Canada, and less than 0.01% of land in that region was adequate for native bee and honeybee nutrition. So we can be doing a much better intentional job with our management and our policy when it comes to bee habitat. This is a California pollinator strip. This is what agriculture looks like in my neck of the woods. A lot of tillage, a lot of monocropping, a lot of very intense chemical agriculture. And it's too bad because it didn't used to look like this. So this is back in like 1947-ish. This is the 40s and 50s in California. Where we had a lot of honeybees and we had a thriving native bee population as well. Bombus franklinii still existed in massive numbers. And I love this picture because what do you notice about it? Diversity. And it's a mess. It's a disaster. Like this is an apple orchard and there's weeds all over the place and there's weeds growing up into the tree canopy and the tree canopy is totally unpruned and it's a mess and there's grass everywhere and there's no tillage and there's no Roundup. And I guarantee they had beautiful, delicious, nutritious food that came out of this orchard. This is the exact same landscape today. So this is a commercial strawberry farm, and commercial strawberry farming in this part, this is around Salinas, has pushed out almost all of the other crops in the surrounding areas because nothing can survive the amount of chemicals that are put into the system. And also look what they're doing to the soil. And this matters to us as bee people because 75% of our bees are soil nesters. So this is what my organization is doing about it. We have a program called the initiative called the Regenerative Bee Pasture Project. And here's our questions that we're trying to answer with this project. What is the connection between soil health and bees? Can we create refugia for honeybees and native bees on agricultural landscapes? Can farms also be refugia for people? I'm going to come back to that. Beekeepers, community members, farmers, farm workers, can this be a healthy, delightful place to be? And intentional livestock management is essential in making this system function for both ungulates, our cows, our bovines, as well as our Apis mellifera. This is a pasture experiment that I did on one of my test plots in Southern Oregon. And so what I was trying to do is find what flowers can I interplant into pasture that will feed not only honeybees, but a lot of native bees as well. And this flower is a Maximilian sunflower, which is native to the Midwest. I've seen it around Colorado as well. It grew really, really well. It was super strong, super drought resilient. A farmer friend of mine saw that we were having such good luck with it, so she planted a huge pasture of it, and it was the only crop on her whole entire farm that survived the Almeida fire, which was quite interesting. So it's also fire resilient to a degree. And but this, however, was the one flower that the cows did not want to eat. They were super uninterested in it. This is my favorite cow, Tomato, and I'm trying to make her eat this Maximilian sunflower, and she just refused. They wouldn't do it. And I just got really upset because I was like, oh, like, and if farmers are going to plant these flowers, they need to be something that's super appealing to cows. It has to be a win-win-win situation. But I had the pleasure of going to this bison ranch this last summer to go test the waters of doing a bee project together, which we are going to do in 2023, which I'm really excited about. And this is, so they have genetically pure American bison living their best lives. There's 1,500 head living on 28,000 acres. They use holistic management from the Savory Institute to manage their buffalo herd. They use rotational grazing. They do absolutely amazing things there. And there are honeybees there as well. And there are non-native flowers such as alfalfa that spring up all over the place. And the bison love those. And that works just fine. And they don't really care. There's some other plants, like there's some thistles that they'll leave around, and they won't tell the county that there's thistles there, so they don't have to spray. But the bison really, they do munch on them from time to time, and they do like them, so they leave them. It's totally spray-free. But the Maximilian sunflower, which is native to this area, is down there living its best life, and I noticed that the bison will not touch it with the 10-foot pole. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is what nature is trying to tell us, that it's fine for us to have non-commodifiable, non-extractable resources within an agricultural system. It doesn't all have to be for something that we can make money off of or make our cows fatter off of. We can have things that are there that remain to build soil, build ecological health, and feed bees. This is I know I'm like going way over my 8 minutes. So I'm just about done. I just wanted to share another success story. This is my friend Emily Fullstone, who's a 7th generation rancher in Nevada. And we'll be doing a honeybee and native bee project partnership together next year in 2023 as well. I just love that she was able to really show that it's possible to transition off of chemical agriculture. So her family's ranch was always managed conventionally. And about 5 years ago now, she introduced the idea of vermicompost, vermiculture, which is basically managing your ranch's health with worm poo. And so they now manage the 6,000 acre ranch purely with worm poo, bubbled worm poo that go into these spas and become more bacterially rich. But she saves her ranch $2.1 million a year from transitioning away from chemical agriculture. And it's become massively bee-friendly for both honeybees and native bees. So again, I just want to point back to, like, here's the problems that we're facing with bees inside and outside of the hive. And one of the and the solutions to me really do come back to nutrition. It doesn't come back to getting more and more honeybee hives out on the landscape or in our cities or on our rooftops. Really, it comes to like good management and good policy. And I encourage, when you're thinking today and tomorrow in your session about good management and good policy, to continually bring it back to coexistence, to complexity, and to context. And this is something else that I would encourage you to bring it back to too, is now forest bathing has become all the rage. So people go out into the woods, and maybe they're from the city and they didn't really grow up in the woods, and they go into the woods and they have these really spiritual experiences where they sit amongst the green and feel good and lay down and watch the trees. But wouldn't that be cool if we could have farms that were just as regenerative for our spirits and our souls? So what about farm bathing? Could we make our farms somewhere where we would want to go for spiritual renewal? And what about backyard bathing? Instead of spending all that time and all those miles to get out into the forest to bathe, why not make our backyards and our city parks somewhere where you could just lay down and soak in all that green space instead of having acres upon acres upon acres of mowed lawns and not a lot of trees. So I love this quote from Sam Droege, which I heard in a lecture he gave last month. The saving of the bees is the saving of the plants. And that's me.
Okay, James, now have at it.
All right, how's the volume? Everyone can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for the very great talk. I really like the theme of coexistence. And my theme today is what happens when you tip that balance and lose that coexistence and have honeybees potentially causing problems as livestock in natural ecosystems. And I like to start by acknowledging these good friends of mine who works alongside me to get some of these data that I'm going to show you today, and also a huge number of scientists all over the world who provided us their data for free for our global level analyses, and also the agencies and people that have made this past work possible. All right, so let's start with a global perspective. It's well known that honeybees have been introduced worldwide. They make super delicious honey. They're really great pollinators. They are really excellent livestock for managing, probably more so than most other insect species in the world. But it's probably less obvious that they have also established very strong presence in natural areas worldwide outside of places where humans have been able to keep an eye on them and keep a good management practice on them. So on this world map, every one of these circles that has even just a little sliver of brown represents a location where researchers have documented honeybees impacting natural ecosystems in some way. And as you can see, many of these locations in the world are outside of honeybees' native range, which means that honeybees are impacting these natural ecosystems as an introduced non-native species that lacks co-evolutionary relationships with the plants and pollinators that they're sharing the ecosystem with. And my colleagues and I tabulated these data that are presented in these little circles, and we found that honeybees occurred in 52 out of the 80 studied locations around the world. And pretty much anywhere you expect honeybees to be able to survive in the wild on their own, honeybees are present. And they ranked in the top 3 in terms of pollinator visits to the various plant species that were studied in 26 localities, which means in fully half of these places where honeybees have been introduced by humans, they very quickly rise to the top in terms of becoming a dominant pollinator in natural, unmanaged landscapes. And this goes to show the issue of the potential conflict between honeybees and native pollinators. This is a global conservation challenge, not just something that happens when we stock honeybees at high densities in the context of apiaries. And now we're going to take a closer look at what honeybees are doing at the biologically relevant scale, which is the local ecosystem level. We're going to use San Diego, where I did my PhD, as a test case, where honeybees accounted for about 75%, so 3/4 of all the pollinators that we encountered when we went out to survey pollinator visits on native plants in the field. And this is what we found. In this figure, the x-axis here, you can think of as showing how abundant a flower species is in the landscape at a given time. And the y-axis shows how dominant honeybees are on said flower species. So when you have these boxes that are stacked low on the chart, it means that they are predominantly visited by native pollinators. When you have boxes that are up very high in this chart, which it means that the flowers are dominated by honeybees. As you can see here, plant species that are relatively uncommon in the environment. So in these exponential counts, bins 1 to 3, these are kind of rare to medium rare plants. These plants are mostly dominated by native pollinators, while the most abundantly blooming plant species are overwhelmingly dominated by honeybees. And this ability of honeybees to dominate these abundant, rewarding, profitable floral resources makes a lot of sense because, as we know, honeybees are social organisms. They can recruit their nestmates to the most preferred food resource in a landscape. As long as they can find it and navigate back to their nest, they can point out where it is to their sisters, and they can go kind of en masse and get as much of it as they can. Whereas most of our native pollinators are unable to do such a thing. They're free agents, every bee or fly or wasp or moth or butterfly for him or herself. And this seriousness of this issue becomes apparent when we look at patterns of interactions between pollinators and plants. In this graph here, it looks like there's a lot going on. Just gonna very quickly break it down. The top black bars are different pollinator species. So each bar is one species. And the bottom black bars are plant species. Again, each bar is one single plant species. And the gray lines that connect the pollinators to the plants are the frequencies of how often each pollinator species is visiting each plant species. So in San Diego, this big black bar, which I've now colored orange. This is honeybees, as you would expect, the most abundant pollinator in the system. And these are the plant species that have the very abundant flowers that, as you can see here, their visits are basically dominated by honeybees. So honeybees are removing the lion's share of resources that are being put out by these kind of most foundational plant species. And through this kind of visual representation, you can also see that these plants that are dominated by honeybees tend to be the species that are also supporting the vast majority of our native pollinator species. And so when honeybees preferentially remove resources from these very foundational, highly abundant plant species, they may be exerting an impact on the native pollinators that's even larger than you would just expect based on the honeybees' overall abundance, because this ability and tendency to dominate the most profitable food resources places them disproportionately at potential conflict with the vast majority of native pollinators. And to kind of put this into perspective in a more kind of applied, realistic context, I like to bring us back to places where pollinator conservation is most necessary. So places where biodiversity is being eroded at the highest rates, such as urban landscapes. This is maybe a landscape that is familiar to many of you. This is the Butterfly Pavilion in Colorado. And we know through previous research that pollinators can persist in urban areas, especially if there are remnants of natural vegetation or designated green space, some sort of natural preserves that can serve as their habitat, even if they are embedded in an urban landscape. And native pollinators, like this little mining bee here, may be able to find all the resources they need just in these habitat patches. And they may also be restricted to these patches by barriers such as roads and houses, other infrastructure in the urban landscape that they perceive as unprofitable habitat, and therefore they don't cross them frequently. Now, honeybees, on the other hand, they're famous for being unimpeded by most forms of barriers, and therefore they can descend into a habitat patch from far and wide and extract large amounts of resources and leave the native pollinators that are stuck in those fragments potentially with insufficient food and also unable to go elsewhere to get enough food. Another important context for pollinator conservation, which Sarah also brought up, is agricultural landscapes. Native pollinators, as you may guess, are already oftentimes scarcer in these landscapes because often there's not a lot of food around, especially if the landscape is mostly non-flowering crops like corn, like wheat. And it's even worse for these native pollinators if they also have to compete with honeybees. So if we apply our data on how honeybees are dominating the most profitable food resources in whatever habitat they find themselves in, we can make some guesses as to what might happen in this landscape. So the plant species that bloom in low or intermediate abundances, these ones in green here, would most likely generally be relegated to small isolated patches of remnant natural habitat, so kind of places that are too wet to plow, or windbreaks, or hopefully, farmers are putting conservation easements to encourage wildlife, which is, I think, happening more and more. And it's a very encouraging phenomenon. But these will still represent a very small minority of the available land area in a highly highly agriculturalized landscape. Whereas large fields will generally host non-blooming crops. And even if these fields do host blooming crops like cherries, canola, fruit trees that could supplement the diets of a lot of our native pollinators, they would tend to fall in the category of these plant species that have abundant blooms in the resource that honeybees will be very good at recruiting to and exploiting, such that native pollinators may potentially have very little to get for themselves if honeybees are stocked at high enough densities. So at the conclusion of my talk, it may seem like I'm forecasting a lot of doom and gloom, but that's not my goal in sharing these findings with the panel here and with all of you. But rather, I think when we have a deeper understanding of how honeybees function and they behave in the environments that we place them in, we can devise better strategies to minimize conflict between these guys, the most important agricultural insects in the world, and the native pollinators that keep our ecosystems healthy. So again, going back to the theme of coexistence that Sarah brought up. And so I look forward to discussing with all of you and with my fellow panelists about how we can best put these findings from this work into policy and management in our favor, and also in the favor of the honeybees that we have, responsibility to steward over, and also our native pollinators that we are responsible for conserving. And that's it from me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James. That was awesome. Okay, just for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna stop the recording and start up. All right, which one's yours? Let me see. Briles.
Briles, yep. There you go.
I know we're running short on time, but I'm hoping everybody wants to stick around for like the 10-minute break for our discussion. So Christy's gonna.
I'm gonna try to run through this as fast as quick.
But
it builds on both of these talks, Sarah's and James' talks, so it's really cool. Okay.
Lunch, hopefully we'll be okay.
All right, you want it recorded or not?
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm with CU Denver. So I'm interested, so I have honeybees on buildings in downtown Denver on Auraria campus. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of local dynamics between basically getting at nutrition, plants, and what these guys are bringing in. I use honeybees as environmental sentinels. So I use them to understand the environment and the type of environment that we live in. I'm a big environmental scientist, so they're great at doing that. I don't have to kill native bees to do that. There's plenty of honeybees to go around. So, but I study pollen. And here in the middle, you'll see this is actually a squash pollen type. It's quite large, and there's different types of pollen out there. I try to categorize them in both wind pollen as well as insect pollen, right? So the insects tend to transport these large pollen types, whereas wind pollen types are quite small, so they can go airborne. But I look at habitat and forage through pollen. I also look at pesticides, types of pollution. And I guess that, I also do a little bit of authentication of honey because you can geolocate based on pollen in the honey and that kind of thing. But we can use all this to understand, environmental health, pollinator health, and human health. Okay, so just to remind you, there might be a quiz, that there is the majority of plants out there are actually flowering plants, and they don't produce all that much pollen because they don't need to. So they have these organisms that go out and do their bidding. Whereas wind-pollinated plants have to produce copious amounts. So in the springtime, all of you who have allergies know this, you're allergic to wind pollen, primarily because they're producing a ton of it, right? And it's airborne. It's out there, and you are picking it up. I can vacuum your clothing and I could tell you where you live based on the pollen signature of all that airborne pollen out there. Pine pollen is pine is the most widely produced pollen type out there. It produces an amazing amount. We find it out in the middle on ships in the middle of oceans and stuff. So it's quite ubiquitous and transports really well. All right, so where can bees thrive in Colorado? This is one question I've been working on since 2017, since we moved some hives up on the roof of Student Commons, but I also have hives in Littleton, as well as I had some hives in Montrose, Colorado, on the western slope, and some agricultural. So these are the locations. The yellow circle is where their foraging range is. You can see how much urban pavement impervious surface there is right there. This is the Littleton area foraging ranges. And here's the Montrose, and you can see all the nice agricultural corn. There were some, actually, during the time here, there's a lot of hemp being grown out there. And there's been some question about how much do bees use hemp, right? Hemp is a wind-pollinated plant. Okay, so when we looked at this, so this is the average honey and pollen production per hive at these different locations. On a Rary campus in the Denver downtown area, you can see only about 5.3 kilograms of honey, and this is just off the honey super. It's not the entire hive, it's the honey super. And then the blue, so the yellow is honey, and the blue is pollen, the amount of pollen coming in, concentrations of pollen coming in per day, per hive in millions of grains. So Littleton, you can see a little bit more there, 15 kilograms, and then Montrose, we're about what we are downtown Denver, so 5.6, whereas pollen production is around 18. What was interesting to me was, like, why is pollen production so high downtown and in rural agricultural locations? So the next question was, for me, because I was like, what are they actually foraging on? Okay, we can look at some pollen. All right, so, whoops, I gave it away. Whoops. So when I looked at this, so these are pollen percentages. So this gives us an indication of pollen abundance, which is an indication of basically plant abundance out there, right? So what are they foraging on? And you can see there's some similarities across the regions in terms of pollen types. I know the text is kind of small. But what's important here, and what I've done, is I have differentiated the wind-pollinated types in white from the red. Red is wind, white is insect. And you can see, and I've added up the percentages there. So on Rary campus in Montrose, it's very comparable. So about 38% of what they're foraging on is wind pollen. And in the suburbs, it's about 13%. So that was like an aha moment for me, because it's like, okay, well, there's an abundance of wind-pollinated types out there, which aren't very nutritious for bees in the first place, right? So there is a problem with scarcity, I do believe, in downtown Denver, as well as in these agricultural locations, at least in Montrose. So what I've been saying is that there's basically a food swamp. So there's a lot of non-nutritious types of plants in downtown Denver that's readily available to bees. You think about the plants that are the trees that are being planted. One of the big trees that is really great for bees, both honeybees as well as native bees, is lindens in the urban environment. But this is actually some native bee research that we did, that I had an undergrad work on. And it's a very different spectra of pollen that they're pulling in. There is some overlap, and the wind pollen is about 20%. I didn't put the average up there, but it's around 20%. It's a little bit less. This is mostly from the urban center. And let's see, the other thing that I wanted to note on this is, notice that linden, they are sourcing linden, and they're also, interestingly enough, sourcing horse chestnut. So these are non-native plants. So they are going out for non-natives. Now, some of these things I can't tell you if they're native or not, because pollen is, you can't get down to species level with pollen unless you're really good and want to spend a lot of time doing that. So a lot of this is family level. So the peas, for example, Fabaceae, the legumes, it's really hard. But a lot of what they feed off are locusts, honey locusts. And the mints are a big deal, right? Mints are huge. Onion, believe it or not, the onion family. Spirea is a common plant both honeybees and native bees use quite readily. So that's just a good kind of general idea of what's going on there. The other thing I've had a graduate student look at is native bee population dynamics in Denver, and Adrian helped with this study quite significantly. Thank you. So she found about 129 different species of bees within this study region. She was looking at the urban, basically a wildland urban gradient to see what the dynamics in both abundance and population was. And what she found was a decline, which is kind of common, right? So from the wildland interface or all the way into the urban city center, there was a decline in abundance, population, as well as diversity of bees, and a lot of different traits and that kind of thing that were going on. Okay, so I've been pulling up some studies around to say my big thing is how much do we actually need in the urban center or the urban environment to sustain honeybee populations. And a couple of studies have looked at this recently. And used mostly remote sensing, which is kind of, in terms of trying to figure out what kind of resources are out there for them. And so in London, this is London, beehives need about 32 acres of urban green space to support one colony. Or we can think of this as a max of 2.9 colonies per mile square. So, and both studies that are up here basically found the same thing. So both of them are Europe, but we can obviously look at that in the United States. So I'm on 0, so we're good. Okay. All right, I think that's good. Thank you.
So I know.
Sit up here.
Yeah. Okay. I know we're running late, but I do want to give everybody a few minutes chance to get some questions into what's supposed to be our panel. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to bring up James. Okay, I think, James, you should be up there now. Sorry, I totally forgot to screen share that last one with you, James. Y'all get a huge view of James's face, so...
Please don't.
If you've got questions, raise your hand, get a piece of paper, jot them down. Do you got any written to get going with? I have lots written down, but I want to hear what y'all say. So question number 1, we live near a creek, a lot of mosquitoes. For the past few years, we've had a company use organic pesticide to keep mosquitoes at bay. Are these treatments harmful to native bees? If so, what else could we do to help? Any thoughts on mosquito control, especially in urban environments?
Yeah, well, a pesticide is a pesticide, and it's something that kills something, and so it's going to have an effect on your native ecology. And I heard of a project that the Boy Scouts used to do back before there was massive pesticides going into our urban areas, where the Boy Scouts would go around and they would ask to go into people's yards and flip over pools, flip over tires, like any kind of standing water that they could find. They would basically eliminate standing water, which is where the larva would breed. And then conservation districts too, my conservation districts will give away little mosquito eater fish if you have a pond or some kind of stagnant water on your property and you can't flip it over, or like horse troughs or something like that. So there's always ways to get around using pesticides. I think that, it's scary with Zika and all the different things that they can spread, but there's still so many options out there besides just poisoning everything.
Well said. I'm going to move pretty quickly through our panels and try to direct the questions to where I think they should go. So how about for James, since you know probably the most about native bees, what are a few things that a homeowner could do to try to help promote those rare native bees over honeybees in their own backyard?
That's a good question. I think from both my observations and how the data have borne out, honeybees really like big patches of things that they can learn. Like honeybees are super smart, and they preferentially learn plants that are very rewarding and or very abundant. So if you're a homeowner and you want to encourage native bees, of course, do your research, figure out what species are native to your region and easy to grow, easy on the eyes. We're only going to focus on plant species that we can actually make happen in our yards, as I'm finding out as a first-time homeowner, how frustrating that can be. But also diversifying so that you don't have big monocultures of any one thing. Because anytime you have a big patch of any one thing, that's telling the honeybees, this is a target. You can tell your nestmate that you can come back here and reliably find a big patch of this thing, and we should all come here and take all the nectar and pollen we can. Whereas if you have little pockets of various different things, especially if they're intermixed, it makes it very difficult for honeybees to recruit their nestmates and say, there's this one thing here that's really, really good. If you can have various different locations in your yard for different plant species that are adapted to different microclimates, for example, if you can have plant species that span the blooming season, some that bloom early, some that bloom late, and have just enough of each thing to make it an attractive kind of stopping point for pollinators. For native pollinators, I think that will be a good strategy going forward. And of course, if you want to have native pollinators actually colonizing your yard, you also have to think about nesting sites. So leaving potentially some dead leaves and other kinds of vegetation around for bees that nest in wood tunnels, bees that nest in the ground, having some bare ground or unmulched areas would also be helpful.
Excellent. Sure, go ahead.
One quick addition is if you want to start simple, do no mow May. It's so fun. Just don't mow in May. And then you'll love it because it's so fun. And so you'll keep going into June. And it'll be really cool to see. Last year we did it in our backyard. Well, I moved in with my boyfriend last year, and my backyard is that I had my old house is I would use my regenerative bee pasture mix. So I had just agricultural pasture flowers. But I talked him into doing no mow May. And so instead of mowing once or twice a week, we just let the backyard go crazy, and none of the neighbors complained because they couldn't see it. And it was amazing to see the native flowers that had been dormant for 20 years in the backyard just appear out of nowhere. And there were massive species of native bees that came into the backyard out of absolutely nowhere. I'd never seen them in the neighborhood before. So that's an easy one, is just don't mow.
So just a couple things for those of you who live in Denver. Trees are a good thing. And the ones, because they produce a lot of pollen and nectar for bees. So two of the big ones, or three maybe of the big ones, are lindens. I know they're non-native. There's also the Chinese lantern tree. I know you don't like it, but the bees love it. Sorry. No, not that one. Not. It's a different one. It's not that one. And honey locust. Sorry, honey locust.
Locusts are great. Fabaceous.
I mean, how many native trees do we have for the plains? Right?
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to ask one here that really gets at the crux of the issue. Given that we've just heard talks about coexistence of honeybees and native bees, that we talked about shared resource use, how can you go about determining what the carrying capacity is across the landscape for honeybees or native bees, and how might we go about trying to figure out what that balance should be? Any thoughts? I think everybody can contribute here.
Well, it comes down to context. It comes down to right time, right place for everything. There's not one square acre in Denver or the surrounding agriculture areas or the surrounding wildlands where the same prescription is going to work. It just totally, so you have to take it, I would say take it acre by acre. There's not going to be one prescription.
Yeah, so my take as an ecologist is that unless you are consistently extracting honey from the colonies, if you're keeping them as pollination agents and you're finding that you're consistently having to feed them large amounts of food, if honeybees, which are very, very good at going out into the environment, finding plants, telling their sisters how to find them, if they are unable to find enough food to even feed their own colony and they start exhibiting symptoms of starvation, if this dominant pollinator is exhibiting those signs, then my guess is that there are native pollinators, especially those that share the same kinds of food resources that honeybees really like. They're also going to be feeling that pressure. So if it were up to me, I would probably put that threshold at, saying that the pressure of honeybees is sustainable and potentially, more in line with coexistence. If you put your colony out there and you find that you're rarely having to feed them, they're constantly able to provide for themselves and they're in good health. Versus if you're finding that you're having to feed them a lot, they're probably putting too much pressure on the system, more so than the system can sustain.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I have a question for you, Sarah, and even honeybee keepers here, which is what you need from a landscape perspective is to know how everybody's honeybees are doing, right? Because everybody puts out your own hive. And so, this is where I think honeybee keepers play a really key role, because I've given talks at dozens of honeybee keepers associations, right? And communicating amongst yourselves can help you know if your honeybee hives in your area are doing well or not. And so what we really need is to get communication between them and land managers and conservationists, right? So I don't know, a lot of honeybee keepers, I don't think like reporting issues. So how do you engage honeybee keepers in that kind of dialogue?
That's a tough one, because I think for the last couple of decades, since the early 80s when we really started seeing the boom of monocrop agriculture as well as varroa mites coming in, commercial beekeepers tend to have a mentality of scarcity. And when you have a mentality of scarcity, you act funny. You tend to be really secretive. There's a lot of things that come from scarcity mentality. And so I would just, we have to work to create abundance in the system so we can have abundance in the mentality and come at it from an abundance mentality. And then commercial beekeepers would probably be more open to collaborate and to share and to not feel like they're just hanging on for their lives. So,
We do not have the statutory authority to even inspect for you to export your beehive to another state, which requires that apiary inspection. Yeah. So we really need the Colorado State Legislature to open up that act. We really need to fund CSU extension programs to educate beekeepers. We really need to also have a requirement, like almost every other state has, where you register that hive and it's inspected. Because right now what we are facing is there could be a cataclysmic event about to happen in backyard beekeeping and among our honeybee hives, and we would have no way of knowing it. We do not have our finger on the pulse because we do not have the authority and we do not have the mechanisms in place in Colorado to be able to do anything about it.
Yeah. State apiary inspectors are excellent policy. That's something that every state should have. And so that's too bad that there is that. Yeah.
Your state legislators and say, we have to fix this problem. I'm lobbying on behalf of that as a state agency and the person has that ability, but I have no authority by statute to do anything for backyard beekeeping. We don't even, I get calls all the time. I cannot do anything for you.
Yeah. Well, and I see this already as, you know, you're starting to hear a bunch of passion around this issue. And what I would argue is that those backyard beekeepers should be the biggest voice right now, and they're not at the table for the most part because we don't have a mechanism within our regulation to bring them to the table. What you need to do is, right, is convince all of those backyard beekeepers that it's in their best interests and the interests of their hives for us to have a means to keep track of pesticides in their hives, of diseases, right? Because we all benefit from everybody keeping healthier hives.
How many are you working with the cities at all?
That's the other problem.
Okay.
Colorado, as you know, is a local control state. And so there are some cities that have policies and laws regarding beekeeping, and there are some who do not have anything. And so how am I supposed to help navigate people who move to a specific city or county about how many hives am I allowed to have?
Yeah.
For example, there is literally nothing that we have. It's a patchwork of laws that are very hit and miss.
So if anybody's interested in coming tomorrow to the exploration meeting, I would like to hear more discussion around this. What I'm going to propose and ask of our panelists is, I have a huge stack of questions, as I thought I would get. I would like to digitize these questions to share with you guys, to get your responses, and to email back out to the group. Is that something y'all be interested in, right? And, you know, I think this is a continual discussion that, like, we as the summit might query you guys with a survey to see how what your opinions are on this, what some of the proposed solutions you think could help. So I think there's a lot of work we could do in the next year or two around this kind of subject so that we can all educate ourselves and make sure that we sustain both wild pollinators and our managed pollinators. So I know we're running long. I thank you guys so much. Let's give them a huge round of applause for helping out. We'll take a really brief break and then be right back within 3 to 5 minutes for our next talk. Okay?